What's in the best interest of the population in the long term and the country's economy when it comes to price controls? Who do such measures really serve? On tonight's edition of KTN Business Weekly, we interrogate the wisdom or lack thereof of imposing price controls. Also tonight on KTN Business Weekly, we tackle your questions around greenhouse farming on a smaller scale. And later on in our business success segment, turning the gifts that nature gives us into a cosmetic business. Good evening and welcome to this edition of KTN Business Weekly. I'm Michael Oyer. Price controls are not new to Kenya and definitely not new to economies the world over. They're ordinarily introduced on the premise of the good of the greater population. But it has also been argued that while they may initially give the impression of relief from exorbitant prices for basic goods, they breed unhealthy market practices such as hoarding and the growth of the black market. So are price controls beneficial or detrimental to the healthy and sustainable growth of the economy? Our feature has more.
In the face of escalating food and fuel prices and the resultant runaway inflation, an old ogre is creeping back into the Kenyan economy, an economic tool that had been shelved, at least in Kenya, for the last 2 decades. Price controls is a policy tool used to maintain affordability of basic goods and services, and which continues to draw varied reactions from different quarters. It's widely viewed by insiders in the economic field as a populist tool used by politicians to gain favor with the public whenever tough times come calling.
In our view, it's not the best thing to think of. Forget about even implementing in the first place. The reason is that we have already opened up our markets regionally, talk about the East African community, talk about the COMESAs, talk about the world. So Kenya has already opened up itself. So locking itself, internally within the Kenyan boundary in terms of pricing, it will actually make us very uncompetitive in the region.
Now, in the liberal market-driven economies, price controls would not be the option because it tells you that something's not working right. There are 2 forces in a market, the force of demand and the force of supply. And when they meet, they set a market clearing mechanism so that the number of people looking for a certain good or a certain service would be equal to the number of people or to what is, the supply side will supply that.
Indeed, history and evidence based on data shows that price controls everywhere and every time cause more misery to the society. This loss in welfare is because price controls often lead to shortages and emergence of black markets, and second, leads to long queues, thus leading to wastage of precious man-hours. In France in 1793, price controls on agricultural produce, including baking flour, resulted in shortages. Here at home, Kenyans witnessed long queues across the country in the late 70s and early 80s following shortages of food commodities and fuel once price controls were instituted. Most recently, just last month, following the application of price regulation, long queues were witnessed in fuel stations in Kenya.
And many of us remember the days when there was price controls, and we remember just endless queues. Every time you came across a queue near a shop, you queued. You didn't know what it was, but you were likely to need it at the end because it was either likely to be grain, likely to be sugar, likely to be something that you require as a consumer.
What we saw 2-3 weeks ago, the shortage of fuel was actually an artificial aspect. It was artificial so that it was people to demonstrate. The private sector was telling government in a very uncivilized way that we do not agree with the price fixing. And remember, as consumers, we were willing to pay even 300 shillings. I remember personally fueling my car as late as about midnight because the queues were too long, and if I would have found a way of paying slightly perhaps more so that I can get that particular commodity, then I'll have done so.
When price controls are put in place, in the near term, prices generally fall, but more often shortages will begin to appear. In the long term, the shortages become widespread and riots due to inadequate supplies of goods and services are almost assured. In an economy where production is in private hands, price controls have the effect of lowering incentives to produce, which is what causes shortages. If the government sets the price of goods like tomatoes, milk, maize flour, salt and cooking oil too low, there is no incentive for production in the economy to take place to meet demand. Farmers and other producers would not be willing to give away their produce only for them to incur a loss. Moreover, the unscrupulous traders would engage in selling at lower standards, such as diluting milk with white powder, diluting sugar with starches, maize flour with chalk dust, or tinkering with weighing scales.
We have what I see as probably cartels. We have what you call concentrated economic interests, and these interests are the ones which are controlling the supply. And for them, it is good business if they can limit the supply because prices are going up, so they're making much more profit. So the best way to deal with that is to deal with those suppliers and say what is it that government can do or we as Kenyans can do to ensure that there is adequate supply of maize, there is adequate supply of fuel, there is adequate supply of goods and services that Kenyans are demanding. Because unless we do that, profiteers will always want to make a kill.
If you could control the entire prices from the international oil price to the price of electricity to the price of labor to the price of transport to the price of grain, then obviously, or price of raw materials, then you can say you've controlled it and have a predetermined outcome. But since it's almost nearly impossible for government to control that range of prices, attempting to do it at one end can lead to a lot of disruptions in supply.
However, the fact does remain that inflationary pressure emanating from escalating commodity and services prices should be tackled. A proper way to do this, according to most players, is creating a proper supply-demand ratio and keen monitoring of money supply.
They should be ready to have a strategic mechanism in place to say, even if the suppliers do not supply us for 2 years, we can still survive because we thought about it in advance. Take foodstuffs. Maize, the price is going up. You know, all sorts of things are going up in the consumer basket. We should, in this country, have strategic reserves of food supply. And it is not that that's something that should come as a shock simply because rains failed in this place or failed in the entire country. We should have a mechanism that says this nation requires so many bags of maize. And we should factor in assumptions to say, supposing it doesn't rain for 2 years, what should we do? And we should plan for those kind of things up front.
A liberalized market with lower cost of production can give you much products at competitive level because the only thing a lot of companies compete on is on the basis of price. So if we can then manage and ensure that people can produce as efficiently as and effectively as possible, they can get their goods onto the market at an affordable rate. If you do find that there are cartels, bust them. That is the work of public policy.
The reality, however, is that what Kenyan consumers are going through is not unique and is being experienced by consumers all over the world. Populist policies that will ruin the economy and cause untold misery to consumers should never be implemented.
KTN Business Weekly returns with tonight's Enterprise featuring Tree Plus, a company that is turning neem and baobab into household names on the cosmetics industry front. That and more when KTN Business Weekly returns after the break.